The fate of cities varied greatly, with periods of significant decline and then periods of increased urbanization. And this was buoyed by rising productivity and expanding trade networks. And we're going to talk about what that means. Following the collapse of the Roman Empire, a new Indian Ocean system rose to take its place. And this system was focused on the expanding trade which was coming in from Eastern Asian countries like India with its textiles. There was also a rise of Arab nations in northern Africa that were trading goods like gold and ivory into this new southern system. And there are two main trade routes open at this time: a land route, the Silk Road, and a water route through the Indian Ocean. We talked about that a little bit in the last video. And as a result of these new trade networks, many cities are growing in population as they became more prosperous, and the need for improved transportation led to the development of camel saddles that allowed for longer distance travel. Ship technology was improving for navigation, and many cities are rising along these ocean routes that facilitated trade and allowed for diverse opportunities for new jobs as well as the spread of religions and cultures. But at the beginning of this period, you did have a decline of urbanization. The fall of the empires caused cities to decline. Political order and economic vitality in cities were adversely affected by the fall of the classical empires around 600. When invaders swept through the declining empires, they often targeted the riches of the city and killed most of the population, and the remaining population fled to the countryside. So they're moving out of the city. Unfortunately for merchants and consumers, cities were linked by trade routes, and when bandits made trade routes more dangerous, trade declined and hurt the city's economies, which is also causing people to move. Finally, diseases that devastated the falling empires were particularly destructive in cities because of the high population density. So, like, for example, the 80,000 or so people living in Florence, Italy, when the Black Death hit in the mid-14th century, killed approximately 50,000 people. So you're really hurting your urbanization here. And also you have the little ice age. Climate changed. Because, I'll back up a little bit. You had a decline in agricultural productivity because people were consumed with dealing with these invaders. A lot of people who would have grown up to be a farmer or been working the land were being recruited into the military. More people were dying. And then you had the little ice age. And this also contributed to the decline of agricultural productivity. During this time period, the earth went through a climate change. The average temperature was colder. And that obviously affected agricultural production. So, around the year 1000, you have urbanization growing again. You see cities starting to revive, and there are multiple factors that contributed to this. As new governments gradually replaced those that were collapsed during the classical period, stability and safety slowly returned, and cities began to rebound. Because of the return of military forces from new governments, trade routes are becoming safer, and this created new employment opportunities in the form of trade and merchants and being a person that sells or produces some sort of good that's going to be sold in different places. Invasions from the nomads like the Mongols began to end at the end of the post-classical period, and that's going to make trade routes safer as well. This led to more jobs in the cities, and this attracted more people. We had new food growing methods like crop rotation, like we talked about before, and the Chinampa system, again, which is the floating crops in the lakes and the canals in the Aztecs. Again, this means that more food is available to feed people in the cities, and we've talked about this before. Positive feedback. People are eating more, they're going to reproduce more. Climate change, the core temperature and the average temperature in the world did go up, and this is going to increase agricultural productivity. And that's good for trade and for commerce. And then in Western Europe, agricultural serfs started to gain their freedom after the catastrophe of the Black Death. And many of them left feudal life and moved into the cities. We also have new cities emerging while older cities are declining. In the Tang and the Song dynasties, China had the world's largest, richest, most technologically advanced and beautiful cities. The Tang capital, Chang'an, had about 2 million people, and it had sectioned off government zones, elaborate gardens, suburbs where city workers lived, and busy commercial areas. Hangzhou had more than 1.5 million people and was crossed by canals and bridges, had 10 market centers that sold goods throughout Afro-Eurasia, had theaters, parks, restaurants, and museums. And then Marco Polo, the Italian merchant and explorer, had actually called Hangzhou the best city in the world. In Mesoamerica, you had the Aztecs calling their capital of Tenochtitlan the foundation of heaven. And this was a big contrast to the cities in China. There was no religious significance tied to the cities, but in Aztec culture, there was a religious aspect to this. And this is a depiction of what Tenochtitlan looked like. It was in the middle of the lake. I mean, how crazy is that it supported such a large population of about 150,000 people, which was larger than most of the European cities at the time, and they literally built it in the middle of Lake Texcoco, which is just awesome. The central area of the city of Tenochtitlan housed government buildings and religious structures. Had a great pyramid and 2 temples, stood above all the other buildings, just in the middle. There were markets, gardens, and a zoo. And again, the most unusual thing about it was that it was in the middle of this huge lake. And then you have Venice and Constantinople. Venice was one of the greatest cities in Europe, and we're going to talk more about that in the next unit, and Venice and its significance as far as the Renaissance goes. But it was positioned on 117 islands in the northeast Italian peninsula. It was a major trade hub that linked Europe to Africa, Asia, and especially the Byzantine Empire. It had a very strong economy, and it was a powerful city-state. City-states were still around during this time, but they were, more popular during the classical era. They exported Christian-themed paintings and statuary, or sculpture, statues. And Venice had close political and economic ties to Constantinople, which was another formidable European city of the age. Marco Polo was actually from Venice, so when he complimented the cities he visited in China, it was definitely a high praise.